What's going on, everybody? Kalipa's Tech here, coming back at you with another video. In this video, we're going to be doing a quick comparison between the Google Pixel 6a and the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G. Now before we go any further, as always, I do want to remind you to go ahead and hit that subscribe button. And if you want to learn more about either of these phones individually, I will be linking to several other videos about them in the description, as well as some information about pricing and availability. But with that being said, let's get started. So with the Google Pixel 6a, we're getting a 6.1-inch OLED display with a resolution of 1080p, a PPI of 429, an aspect ratio of 20:9, and an 83% screen-to-body ratio. With the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G, we're getting a 6.7-inch 120Hz Super AMOLED Plus display with a resolution of 1080p, a PPI of 392, and an aspect ratio of 20:9. So both of these phones do have really good displays. The display technology gives them really nice looking colors and great brightness and viewing angles. And of course, having 1080p resolutions means they're going to have nice, sharp, crisp images. So in general, with both of these phones, if you're consuming a lot of content, whether you're watching videos, playing games, or just looking at photos or something, you are going to get a really good experience. But I would say the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G does have some advantages here. First of all, we got a 120Hz display here, whereas the Google Pixel 6a only has a 60Hz display, and this is going to give the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G a little bit faster and smoother movement on the screen. Now you probably can't even see it here, but I will say when you're actually using the phone in real life, you will notice it a little bit. And in addition to this, as you can see here, the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G is clearly larger, and having a larger display, especially when you're consuming a lot of content, is always a good thing. But that being said, on the other hand, I know for some of you, a 6.7-inch display might be too big. So if that is you, if you prefer a more compact phone, then the Google Pixel 6a with, again, a 6.1-inch display might be a better choice for you. Now, both of these phones are getting 128GB of internal storage, but the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G does have microSD card expansion, whereas the Google Pixel 6a doesn't. Now, in my opinion, this isn't really that big a deal. I've personally never actually used a microSD card in a phone before. I mean, I guess I did back in 2010 or something, but in this day and age, when phones have 128GB of internal storage, for most people, it's probably not going to be necessary. But if you have a lot of photos and videos, for example, and you really are concerned about storage, then the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G will have an advantage here. Now for security features, both phones do have really nice looking in-display fingerprint scanners, definitely gives them a nice modern touch. But between the two, only the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G has Face Unlock. So if that is an important feature for you, then definitely keep this in mind. But that being said, let's go ahead and try out these fingerprint scanners, starting with the Google Pixel 6a. There we go, one more time. And there we go. So real fast and responsive here. Moving on to the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G. There we go, one more time. And there we go. So as you can see, both fingerprint scanners are real fast and responsive, no issues whatsoever. It really just comes down to whether or not you actually care about Face Unlock. If you do, again, the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G will have an advantage because it is the only phone of the two that has it, but if you don't care about Face Unlock, then either phone will be just fine. Now for the camera setups here, with the Google Pixel 6a, we're getting a nice looking hole punch design for the front facing camera, and this camera is 8 megapixels. With the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G, we have pretty much the exact same design here, and this camera is 32 megapixels. Now don't be fooled by the megapixel count. Even though the Google Pixel 6a doesn't have a 32 megapixel camera, it still does have a really powerful sensor, and in general, I feel like this phone takes better quality photos overall. Now that being said, before we get into the other features, I do want to let you know, if you want to see actual photo and video samples from either of these phones, I will be linking to their full reviews in the video description, so if you do want to see those details, definitely check that out. Now for the rear cameras, with the Google Pixel 6a, we got a dual camera setup with a 12.2 megapixel main camera and a 12 megapixel ultra-wide camera. With the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G, we got a quad camera setup with a 108 megapixel main camera, a 12 megapixel ultra-wide camera, a 5 megapixel macro camera, and a 5 megapixel depth sensing camera. So as far as the actual camera features go, despite the Google Pixel 6a only having a dual camera setup and the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G having a quad camera, the actual features and abilities in practice are pretty much the same. When it comes to the depth sensing camera, the Google Pixel 6a doesn't really need one because, again, since this phone is a little bit higher end than the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G, the sensor in this camera is going to be powerful enough to not actually need a depth sensor for portrait mode. And with the macro camera, that's a little bit more debatable. On one hand, with the macro camera on the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G, it is actually really good and takes great pictures. But on the other hand, even though the Google Pixel 6a doesn't have a dedicated macro camera, you still can get some close-up detailed images just by putting the phone a little bit closer to the subject and zooming in. So overall, if you really want to get a lot of macro type photos, then the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G will have an advantage with the macro camera, but if you're just taking that kind of photo every now and then, I do think the Google Pixel 6a will be perfectly fine. And again, as far as the actual overall regular photo quality, even though the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G is not bad by any means, in fact it's one of the best in this price range, I do think the Google Pixel 6a does take better photos, so if you want the better camera of the two, then again, I do think the Pixel does have an advantage. And this goes for video as well. With the Google Pixel 6a, you can record in 4K at 60 frames per second in the rear camera and 1080p in the front, and the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G can record in 4K in both the rear and front, but with the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G on 4K at least, the frame rate is limited to 30 frames per second. So when it comes to video, really the only advantage the A73 5G has is that it can record 4K in the front camera, but again, the frame rate is limited to 30 frames per second, whereas you can record in 60 with the Google Pixel 6a. Now I'm not really sure how many people are actually going to be recording 4K videos at 60 frames per second. It does seem like more of a niche feature, but at the same time, the bottom line is both phones can record 4K for the most part, but at the end of the day, if you're really recording a lot of videos and you want the highest quality you can get, then the Google Pixel 6a will be the better choice. Now, as far as RAM and processor go, the Google Pixel 6a is getting 6GB of RAM with the Google Tensor processor. With the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G, we're getting 8GB of RAM with the Qualcomm Snapdragon 778G 5G processor. Now, I ran Geekbench 5 benchmark tests on both of these phones, and with the Google Pixel 6a, we're getting a single core score of 1055 and a multi-core score of 2956. With the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G, we're getting a single core score of 773 and a multi-core score of 2888. Honestly, I always forget that this phone is actually that powerful. But as you can see here, there is a little bit of a difference. The Google Pixel 6a is in fact the faster of the two, but at the same time, the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G is really not that far behind. In fact, it's at the point where as far as performance goes, you're really not going to see a huge difference. Overall, as a general rule, the Google Pixel 6a will probably run a little bit smoother most of the time, but again, no matter what you're doing, as far as processing power goes, these phones are really in the same league as each other. So if you do want a faster phone that can handle higher performance activities like mobile gaming, for example, then you're really not going to go wrong with either of them. Now for the battery, with the Google Pixel 6a, we're getting a 4,410 mAh battery that supports 18W fast charging, and the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G has a 5,000 mAh battery that supports 25W fast charging. So while the Google Pixel 6a does have a pretty good battery, and in my experience, the battery life on this phone has been really good, the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G's battery is just better in every way. So if the battery is a top priority for you, then this phone will have an advantage. Another thing I do want to point out is that neither of these phones have wireless charging, so if you do want that feature, definitely keep this in mind as well. As far as software goes, both of these phones do currently have Android 12, and seeing that these are Google and Samsung phones, you can expect great software support and major updates in the future. In addition to this, both phones do have NFC, so if you like to make contactless mobile payments using Tap and Pay, that's not going to be a problem for either device. But in conclusion, which of these phones is better? Honestly, this is actually a real close one because in a lot of ways, these phones are actually pretty similar. But I would say overall, with the Google Pixel 6a, this phone does have the better camera and the faster processor, and it does give you, of course, the most stock version of Android, being that it is a Google phone. But on the other hand, if you're familiar with Samsung already and you like their Android skin, and you want a larger display with a higher refresh rate, and you also want the best battery as well, then the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G might be a better choice. But in general, no matter which device you go for, both of these phones are really good for what they are and provide quite a bit of value for the money. But this concludes my comparison between the Google Pixel 6a and the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G. Once again, if you want to learn more about either of these phones individually, I will be linking to several other videos about them in the description, as well as some information about pricing and availability because this is always changing. But that's it for this video. If you enjoyed it and found it useful, be sure to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to follow Kalipa's Tech on Twitter and Instagram, and as always, I will see you in the next one.